Imagine standing in a quiet African village just before sunrise. The air is still. The road is narrow. Life moves at the same pace it has for decades. Then, slowly, something feels different. Survey markers appear in the soil. Engineers walk the land with tablets and maps. Heavy machines arrive, not loudly, not dramatically, but with quiet certainty. And before anyone fully understands what's happening, the land begins to change. In the distance, concrete pillars rise. Steel frames stretch toward the sky. A bridge begins to form, where there was once only open ground. Most people assume this is progress funded from within, a government project, a national investment, a future built by local hands for local needs. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if many of Africa's largest infrastructure projects are not truly African in origin? What if they are being planned elsewhere, financed elsewhere, and quietly executed with long-term intentions that stretch far beyond the ribbon-cutting ceremonies? This is not a story about handshakes at summits or smiling photos between presidents. It's not about press releases or trade statistics buried in reports that few people ever read. This story is written in concrete, steel, and silence. Across the continent, railways are slicing through landscapes that had been disconnected for generations. Ports are rising along coastlines that once handled only modest trade. Dams are being constructed with the power to light up entire regions. These projects are massive, permanent, and transformative. And once they are built, they cannot simply be undone. They shape economies. They redirect trade. They influence who holds power for decades to come. This is the hidden footprint most people don't talk about. Because while global media focuses on elections, conflicts, and political drama, something far more enduring is taking shape beneath the surface. China is building the physical backbone of Africa's future. One project at a time, one country at a time, often without noise, often without resistance, and almost always without full public debate. Bridges appear where none existed. Rail lines stretch across deserts and borders. Ports are designed not just for today's trade, but for tomorrow's dominance. Power stations rise with the capacity to fuel industries that haven't even been built yet. Concrete and steel are quietly redrawing Africa's physical map. And with it, its economic destiny. And here's the part most people miss. These projects are not random. They are not isolated acts of goodwill or coincidence. They follow a pattern, a sequence, a strategy that unfolds slowly enough to avoid alarm, but steadily enough to reshape entire regions. In this video, we are not just listing projects. We are uncovering a system, hidden mega projects that rarely dominate headlines, yet move billions of dollars, redirect global trade routes, and influence future balances of power. Railways that connect landlocked nations to the ocean. Ports capable of handling more cargo than some entire countries. Energy projects designed to supply power far beyond national borders. These are not just developments. They are decisions made in advance about where growth will happen and who will benefit from it. Think of these projects as the skeleton of Africa's future. Every railway is a bone. Every port is a joint. Every power plant is a vital organ. And piece by piece, China is helping assemble that skeleton. Not overnight, not aggressively, but patiently. To understand how deep this influence goes, we have to start at the foundation. Before factories, before ports, before industrial zones, there must be movement. Because whoever controls how goods move controls how economies grow. And that is why it always begins with railways. Railways matter because before power plants, before factories, before ports can reach their full potential, there must be movement. And for decades, movement was Africa's greatest weakness. Tracks laid during the colonial era were never meant to connect African economies to each other. They were designed for one purpose only: extraction. Minerals out, crops out, wealth out. Inland regions were left disconnected, isolated and dependent on slow, expensive road transport. For years, those railways decayed. Rusted tracks, broken stations, trains that barely ran, if they ran at all. Governments talked about fixing them, but the costs were enormous. The political will was fragile, and the returns felt distant. Then, quietly, something changed. China stepped in, not loudly, not dramatically, country by country, agreement by agreement. Financing began to flow. Engineers arrived, Old tracks were not repaired, they were replaced. Entirely new systems were built, standard gauge railways, faster, heavier, designed for modern economies, not colonial extraction. These were not small upgrades, these were nation-shaping corridors. Take Kenya. On paper, the Mombasa-Nairobi Railway looks like a simple transport project, steel tracks linking a port city to a capital. But in reality, it altered the rhythm of the entire economy. Goods that once crawled along dangerous highways for days now move in hours. Transport costs fell. Accidents declined. Businesses reorganized themselves around speed instead of survival. But here is the detail most people overlook. That railway was never meant to stop in Nairobi. It was phase one, always was. The long-term vision stretched beyond borders toward Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan. A regional spine, a system designed not just to move goods, but to redefine how East Africa trades, produces, and competes. Now shift your focus to Ethiopia. Landlocked, massive population, rapid industrial ambition. For Ethiopia, access to the sea is not a luxury, it is economic oxygen. The electric railway linking Addis Ababa to the port of Djibouti changed everything. One corridor, one line, but millions of livelihoods in Mountain or Tim depend on it. Factories rely on it. Exporters rely on it. Industrial zones were planned around it. Every container that rolls along that track represents time saved, money conserved, and competitiveness gained. Without it, Ethiopia's industrial dream slows. With it, the country accelerates. This is what these railways truly are. Not infrastructure. Arteries. And once arteries exist, blood begins to flow. Investment follows tracks. Cities grow along stations. Industries settle where logistics make sense. The map reorganizes itself around steel. Nigeria tells a similar story. From Lagos to Ibadan, from Abuja to Kaduna. Rail lines once abandoned are now operational again, connecting ports to population centres, cities to factories, workers to opportunity. Road congestion eases, commerce stabilises. Rail becomes the backbone of movement once more. Yet despite their scale, these projects rarely dominate headlines. Elections do, conflicts do, scandals do. But railways work quietly. And when they are finished, they influence everything for half a century. China understands this deeply. By financing and constructing these lines, China is not just earning interest or construction fees. It is influencing how Africa moves, where goods flow, which routes become dominant, which cities rise, which regions integrate faster than others. And there is a pattern here. Railways come first. Always. Because once tracks are laid, ports make sense. Power plants become viable. Industrial zones become logical. Railways are the opening move. They are the foundation of control without force, influence without confrontation. And as these tracks spread across the continent, they carry more than passengers and cargo. They carry alignment, dependency, direction. If railways are the veins of Africa's future economy, then what they feed into matters even more. Because movement without access to the world means nothing. And that brings us to the next layer of this quiet transformation. The gateways, the front doors, the ports. Ports matter because nothing enters or leaves an economy without passing through them. They are not just places where ships dock. They are decision points, gateways that determine speed, cost, access, and influence. And quietly, steadily, China has been helping to reshape some of Africa's most important ones. Along Africa's coastlines, from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic, ports are being expanded, deepened, modernized. Larger berths, faster loading systems. Infrastructure designed not for yesterday's ships but for tomorrow's global trade volumes. On the surface, this looks like efficiency, development, progress. And in many ways it is. But beneath that surface lies something more strategic. Consider Djibouti, a small country, few natural resources, limited population. For years, it barely registered in global conversations. Yet its location places it at one of the most important maritime crossroads on Earth, the gateway between Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. Whoever controls access here doesn't need vast territory. They need positioning. China understood this early. Financing and construction transformed Djibouti's port infrastructure into a high-capacity logistics hub. Today, it serves not just Djibouti, but landlocked Ethiopia and the wider Horn of Africa. Fuel, food, machinery, exports, imports, all pass through this narrow corridor. For Ethiopia, this port is survival. For China, it is leverage. Because when a nation's economic lifeline runs through infrastructure you helped design, build, and often manage, influence does not need to be announced. It is embedded. Now shift back to Kenya. The port of Lamu is not just another harbour, it sits at the centre of a much larger vision. A corridor linking Kenya to South Sudan and Ethiopia. Railways, highways, pipelines, all converging on a deep-sea port designed to handle cargo volumes far beyond current demand. That's the key. These ports are not built for today. They are built for what Africa is expected to become. As populations grow, as consumption rises, as industrial output increases, whoever owns the gateways benefits first. And China has positioned itself early, financing, constructing, and integrating these ports into broader trade networks. In West Africa, the pattern continues. Lagos, one of the busiest cities on the continent. Chronic congestion, slow ports, bottlenecks that cost billions in lost productivity. Deep-sea port projects backed by Chinese capital aim to change that. Larger ships, faster turnaround, regional dominance. These ports are designed to serve not just one country, but entire regions, to become hubs where trade concentrates, where shipping routes converge, where logistics decisions are made. And ports, unlike roads or railways, are hard to replace. Once a port becomes dominant, shipping companies adjust their routes. Businesses relocate, supply chains lock in, influence becomes structural. But ports alone cannot operate at full capacity without something else. Something even more fundamental. Energy. Cranes do not move without electricity. Trains do not run without power. Factories do not produce without stable grids. And across Africa, unreliable energy has been one of the biggest barriers to growth. This is where China's involvement deepens further. Hydroelectric dams, thermal power stations, solar farms, transmission lines. Energy projects that do more than light homes. They stabilise economies. They determine where industries can survive, where cities can expand, where ports can operate around the clock. In Ethiopia, massive hydroelectric projects promise not just domestic power, but regional exports. Electricity flowing across borders, influence flowing with it. In other countries, power plants financed and built through Chinese partnerships keep industrial zones alive and ports functional. Energy is never neutral. Whoever helps provide it gains a seat at the table when decisions are made, and there is a quiet financial layer beneath all of this. Loans, long-term repayment schedules, contracts tied to specific suppliers, revenue streams that flow back outward, even as infrastructure remains inward. Africa gains assets, but it also gains obligations. This is not domination through force, it is influence through design. Railways feed ports, ports demand power, power sustains industry. Industry justifies more railways, and the cycle continues, reinforcing itself. And once this system is in place, the final layer emerges. The places where goods are actually made, the factories, the industrial zones, the spaces where Africa's future economy will either flourish or remain dependent. And that is where this story moves next. Factories change everything. Because railways can move goods, ports can ship them, and power plants can energize cities. But without production, an economy remains dependent. This is where China's quiet strategy reaches its most revealing stage. Across Africa, industrial parks are appearing in places that once held little economic weight. Not randomly, not accidentally. They rise near rail lines that already exist, near ports already expanded, near power stations already secured. These zones are not just clusters of buildings, they are carefully planned ecosystems. Roads are laid first. Electricity is guaranteed. Water, telecommunications, logistics hubs. Only then do factories arrive. Assembly plants, textile manufacturers, electronics, agro-processing facilities. Everything positioned to minimize friction and maximize output. Ethiopia offers a clear example. Near Addis Ababa, entire industrial zones have been developed with Chinese financing and planning. Workers are trained. Managers are imported in early stages. Supply chains are optimized. And crucially, these factories plug directly into the Addis Djibouti railway. Goods move from production floor to ship with precision. Time is saved. Costs drop. Competitiveness rises. For Ethiopia, this means jobs, exports, industrial learning. For China, it means something else as well. Integration. African production feeding into global supply chains, where China already plays a central role. Nigeria follows a similar path. Industrial corridors aligned with rail and port infrastructure. Zones designed to attract both local and foreign manufacturers. The promise is clear. Produce here, move fast, trade globally. And this pattern repeats across the continent. Zambia, Senegal, Kenya. Smaller economies included not out of charity, but because scale matters. A connected Africa is a more efficient Africa. And efficiency benefits whoever designs the system. This is why these projects are so rarely discussed as a whole. Individually, each makes sense. A railway here, a port there, a power plant somewhere else, an industrial zone to boost jobs. But together they form a network, a system. And systems shape behaviour. Countries begin to align their trade policies around existing corridors. Cities grow where infrastructure already favours growth. Investments follow the paths that have been cleared. Over time, choices narrow. Alternatives fade. Dependency doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly. China gains several advantages from this. Long-term partnerships secured through financing. Strategic knowledge of local markets and regulations. Political goodwill built through visible development. An influence that doesn't require military presence or direct control. This is soft power, anchored in concrete. But this story is not one-sided. Africa is not passive. Infrastructure is real value. Jobs are real. Growth is real. For countries long denied development capital, these projects unlock possibilities that once felt unreachable. The risk lies not in building, but in balance. Loans must be repaid. Assets must be managed. Sovereignty must be protected. Infrastructure should empower, not constrain. The same systems that accelerate growth can also limit flexibility if choices are not carefully guarded. And that is the real question beneath all of this. Not whether China is shaping Africa's future. That is already happening. The question is whether Africa will shape how that future unfolds. Because once railways are laid, ports dominate, power grids stabilise, and factories lock into supply chains, the direction of movement becomes harder to change. Influence becomes embedded, and history shows that physical infrastructure often outlasts political promises. This is not a story about villains or saviours. It is a story about strategy, about patience, about understanding that the most powerful changes are often the quietest ones. China is not just building projects in Africa. It is helping design the map along which Africa will grow, trade, and compete for generations. And the concrete has already been poured.